My name is Leah, and for most of my life, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was born into a proud Jewish family, raised with traditions that shaped my identity, and taught to cherish the heritage that had been passed down for generations. My life wasn't perfect, but it was predictable, grounded in routine, and guided by values that felt as solid as the ground beneath my feet. That day, the day that changed everything, started out like any other. I had just finished another long shift at work, juggling deadlines and endless emails. I loved my job, but it drained me. It felt like I was always running on a treadmill, chasing something I couldn't quite reach. Still, I reminded myself that I was lucky to have a steady career, especially when so many people struggled. That's what I always did. Found a reason to push through, even when I felt like I was running on empty. As I walked home, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city streets. The sidewalks were crowded with people rushing to wherever they needed to be, faces buried in phones or conversations. I liked walking. It gave me time to think, to untangle the knots in my mind after a busy day. My commute was one of the few moments of quiet in my life, and I needed it. That evening, my thoughts drifted to something that had been nagging at me for a long time: faith. As much as I valued my Jewish upbringing, I had questions, ones I rarely let surface, even in the privacy of my own mind. What did it really mean to believe, to be chosen? I loved the rituals and the sense of belonging that came with being part of a close-knit community. But deep down, I wasn't sure what I believed anymore. These weren't questions I talked about, not even with my husband, David. He was a good man, kind and steady, but I wasn't sure how he'd react if I told him I sometimes doubted the very foundation of our shared life. We'd built so much around our faith, our marriage, our home, even how we planned to raise our future children. Admitting that I had doubts felt like betraying everything we'd promised each other. So I stayed quiet, bearing those thoughts under the weight of responsibilities and expectations. As I walked, I thought about the prayer I'd said that morning, one I'd recited countless times before. The words had come out of my mouth, but they felt hollow, like I was saying them out of habit rather than conviction. I wondered if anyone else felt this way, if they went through the motions while secretly questioning the meaning behind them. Was it wrong to feel this way? Was it normal? I didn't know. The smell of freshly baked bread wafted from a nearby bakery, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Friday evening, and I thought about how my mom would be lighting the Shabbat candles by now. The memory brought a pang of guilt. I hadn't lit candles in weeks, too caught up in work and exhaustion to keep up with traditions that had once felt sacred. I told myself I'd get back to it eventually, but deep down, I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't notice the car until it was too late. 1 second, I was stepping off the curb to cross the street, and the next, there was a deafening screech of tires. Time seemed to slow down as I turned my head, catching sight of a car veering toward me, its driver slumped over the wheel. My body froze, and all I could think was, this can't be happening. The impact came before I could move, and the world around me blurred into chaos. There was a jolt, a flash of pain, and then nothing. No sound, no light, no feeling, just darkness. That's when everything went dark, and my life as I knew it ended. When I opened my eyes, everything was different. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. There was no pain, no sound of chaos, no honking horns or shouting voices. Instead, I found myself surrounded by light, soft, golden, and warm, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It wasn't the harsh glare of hospital fluorescence or the dim flicker of streetlights. This light felt alive, as if it were wrapping itself around me, filling me with a peace I couldn't explain. I stood, or maybe I was floating. It was hard to tell. The ground beneath me wasn't solid, but it wasn't air either. It felt like I was being held by something unseen, supported by a presence I couldn't yet identify. Around me, the light seemed to stretch endlessly, blending into hues of gold, white, and the faintest hints of blue. It was beautiful, serene, and yet completely unfamiliar. For a moment, I panicked. The last thing I remembered was stepping off the curb, the screeching of tires, and the blur of something coming toward me. My chest tightened as I realized I had no idea where I was or how I'd gotten here. Was I dead? The thought sent a jolt through me, and I instinctively reached for my chest, expecting to feel the aches or bruises from the accident. But there was nothing. My body felt whole, weightless even, as though the heaviness I had carried for so long, the guilt, the doubts, the exhaustion, had been stripped away. I looked around, searching for anything familiar, but there was nothing I could recognize. No walls, no sky, no landmarks, just the light, endless and soothing. Strangely, I didn't feel afraid anymore. The peace in this place was overwhelming, calming my racing thoughts and replacing them with a quiet stillness I'd never known. It was as if all the worries that had followed me every day, work deadlines, personal doubts, unspoken questions, had vanished. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. As I stood there, taking it all in, I began to notice something else. The light wasn't just around me, it was within me. It felt as though it was flowing through me, filling every part of my being with warmth and love. Not the kind of love I'd known before, the conditional kind that came with expectations or obligations. This love was pure, unshakable, and infinite. It saw everything about me, the good, the bad, the things I tried to hide, and embraced it all without hesitation. I closed my eyes, letting that love wash over me. It was like being held in the arms of someone who truly knew me, who had always known me. I didn't understand it, but I didn't want it to stop. For the first time in years, I felt safe. More than safe. I felt whole. But as the peace settled over me, so did the questions. Where was I? Why was I here? And most pressing of all, what had happened to me? My thoughts began to race again, and I felt a flicker of unease. Was this heaven? Was it some kind of dream? Or was it something else entirely? I turned slowly, searching for answers in the endless expanse of light. That's when I noticed something strange. In the distance, or at least what felt like the distance, though space seemed to work differently here, I saw a faint figure. It was small, almost indistinct, blending into the light around it, but as I focused on it, the figure began to take shape. It was moving toward me, slowly but deliberately. I froze, unsure of what to do. My first instinct was to call out, but something held me back. I wasn't afraid exactly, but there was a weight to this moment that I couldn't ignore. Whoever or whatever was coming closer felt significant, as if they held the answers to all the questions swirling in my mind. The figure continued to approach, and as it did, I felt the atmosphere around me change. The light seemed to grow warmer, more intense, and the sense of love I'd felt before deepened, becoming almost tangible. It was as if this presence carried the very essence of that love, radiating it outward with every step. My heart began to race, not out of fear, but in anticipation. I didn't know why, but I knew this moment was important. When the figure was close enough for me to make out details, I saw that it wasn't just a shape, it was a person, or at least they looked like a person. Their form was radiant, glowing with the same golden light that surrounded everything in this place. Their face was soft, kind, and full of something I couldn't quite describe. It wasn't just compassion or understanding. It was deeper than that. It was like they could see straight into me, past every layer of doubt and fear, and still looked at me with pure love. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, the figure stopped and smiled. It wasn't an ordinary smile. It was the kind that made you feel like everything was going to be okay, even when nothing made sense. I felt my knees grow weak, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment. Whoever this was, they weren't ordinary. I could feel it in every fiber of my being. Before I could gather my thoughts, the figure spoke. Their voice was gentle, but carried an authority I couldn't ignore. It was like hearing a melody that resonated with something deep inside me, something I didn't even know was there. "Leah," they said, and the sound of my name coming from them sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just the way they said it. It was the fact that they knew it. They knew me. I stared at them, unable to speak, my mind racing with questions. Who were they? How did they know me? Why was I here? But before I could ask, they took a step closer, and the light around them seemed to pulse, wrapping me in warmth. I didn't know where I was or why I was there, but then someone called my name. The figure stood before me, radiating light and warmth, and yet I couldn't look away. It wasn't just their appearance, it was the presence they carried, something deeper than words could ever describe. It wasn't intimidating or overwhelming, it was comforting, like they carried the very essence of peace within them. "Leah," they said again, their voice gentle, but so full of authority that it seemed to reverberate through me. "You've been searching for answers." I froze, my mind racing. How did they know my name? And what did they mean by searching? My chest tightened with a mixture of awe and confusion, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. I just stared, waiting for them to continue. "Don't be afraid," they said, taking a step closer. "You're safe." I wanted to believe that, and deep down, I did. There was nothing threatening about this moment, yet my mind couldn't fully grasp what was happening. "Who are you?" I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling. Where am I? The figure didn't answer right away. Instead, they smiled, a smile so kind, so full of understanding, that it felt like it reached into the deepest parts of me. You already know who I am, they said simply. I shook my head, overwhelmed. I don't understand. You will, they replied, their tone patient and steady. But first, I need you to trust me. Trust. That word echoed in my mind, stirring something I couldn't quite name. There was a part of me that already did trust them, though I didn't know why. Still, my skepticism fought to the surface. I don't even know where I am, I said, my voice rising slightly as my confusion turned to frustration. How am I supposed to trust you? The figure's expression didn't change. They didn't seem offended or impatient, only calm. You're here because it's time for you to see the truth, they said. The truth you've been longing for, even if you didn't realize it. Their words hit me like a wave. The truth. I'd spent so much of my life searching for answers, wrestling with questions I didn't know how to ask. But what truth were they talking about? And why did it feel like they knew me better than I knew myself? I don't understand what you're saying, I admitted, my voice softer now, almost pleading. What truth? The figure took another step closer, and as they did, I felt the light around them intensify. The truth about who I am, they said, their voice carrying a weight that made my heart race. And the truth about who you are. I stared at them, my mind spinning. Who you are, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. They nodded. Leah, you know me. You've always known me, even if you didn't realize it. The words sent a shiver through me, not because they were frightening, but because they felt true. I didn't understand how or why, but something deep inside me stirred as they spoke. I don't think I do, I said, my voice faltering. Yes, you do, they said gently. You've spoken to me before, though you didn't know it was me. You've felt my presence in the quiet moments, in the questions you've asked yourself late at night. I've been with you, Leah, even when you didn't see me. Tears sprang to my eyes, unbidden. Their words resonated in a way that made me feel both exposed and comforted. Who are you? I asked again, my voice trembling. They stepped even closer now, and for the first time, I could see their face clearly. It was like looking at love itself. Every feature radiated kindness, compassion, and an understanding so deep that it felt as though they could see every part of me, even the parts I tried to hide. I am Jesus, they said, their voice steady and calm, and I've come to show you the truth. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Jesus? That didn't make sense. I was Jewish. Jesus wasn't part of my world, my faith, my beliefs. How could this be real? No, I said, shaking my head as tears streamed down my face. That can't be right. I don't believe in you. I can't believe in you. Jesus didn't flinch. He didn't argue or try to convince me. He simply looked at me with an expression so full of love that it made my chest ache. I know this is hard for you, he said, but I'm here because I love you, Leah. I've always loved you. His words cut through me like a knife, not because they were harsh, but because they were so tender, so undeniably true. I wanted to fight it, to push back against everything he was saying, but I couldn't. Something inside me was breaking open, a part of me I didn't even know existed. "But I'm Jewish," I said, my voice cracking. "This doesn't make sense." "I know," he said, his tone filled with understanding. "Your faith has been an important part of your life, and it's brought you here. But there's more, Leah. The promises you've held on to, the prophecies you've studied, they all point to me." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process his words. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "What promises?" "The promises of a Messiah," he said. "The one who would bring redemption to the world, the one who would fulfill the covenant. Leah, I am that Messiah." His words hit me like a thunderclap. My entire life, I'd heard those promises recited in prayers, discussed in teachings, woven into the fabric of my faith, but I'd never once considered that they could point to Jesus. The very idea felt impossible, yet as he spoke, something inside me began to shift. "No," I said again, though my voice lacked conviction. This can't be real." "It is real," he said softly, "and I know it's a lot to take in, but I'm here because I want you to know the truth. I want you to know how deeply you're loved, how much I've always been with you." I felt the tears flowing freely now, my heart torn between disbelief and something I couldn't name. "Why me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you've been searching," he said. "Even when you didn't realize it, your heart has been longing for answers, and I've been waiting for the right moment to show you who I am." I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. All I could do was stand there, caught between the life I thought I knew and the truth that was unfolding before me. My heart felt like it was being pulled in two directions. Yet somewhere deep inside, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Jesus took one more step toward me, his gaze unwavering. "You've always known me, Leah," he said, his voice steady and filled with love, "even if you didn't realize it." His words shook me to my core, and in that moment, everything I thought I knew began to unravel. I stood there, staring at him, my thoughts tangled in a mess of confusion and disbelief. Jesus. The name felt foreign on my lips, like it didn't belong to me or the world I'd grown up in. Yet, here he was, standing before me, speaking to me, radiating a love so pure it felt like it was holding me together. I wanted to look away, to reject what he was saying, but something inside me wouldn't let go. "How can you be the Messiah?" I asked, my voice trembling. "The Messiah is supposed to bring peace to the world, to restore Israel. Look around. There's still so much suffering, so much pain. How could that be true if you're who you say you are?" Jesus didn't flinch at my words. He didn't seem surprised or offended by my questions. Instead, he nodded, his expression full of understanding. "You're right to ask that, Leah. You're right to question. The Messiah was indeed promised to bring peace and restoration, but not in the way people expected. The peace I bring isn't about kingdoms or politics. It's about hearts." He gestured gently, and the light around us seemed to shift, becoming warmer, more intimate. The peace I bring starts within, Leah. It's the peace that comes from knowing you are loved, forgiven, and set free. It's the kind of peace that nothing in this world can take away, no matter the circumstances. I wanted to protest, to push back, but his words struck a chord in me that I couldn't ignore. I thought about the world I lived in, the constant striving, the nagging sense of never being enough. Was that the peace he was talking about? Was that what I'd been searching for without realizing it? But what about the promises? I asked, my voice still unsure. The prophecies? They said the Messiah would come to redeem Israel, to restore the kingdom. They did, he said gently, and I have. But the kingdom I came to restore isn't a political one. It's a kingdom of the Spirit, a kingdom where love and grace reign. Leah, the prophecies you've studied your whole life, they all point to me. Everything you've been waiting for has already been fulfilled, just not in the way you expected. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I thought about the prophecies I'd learned as a child, the promises woven into the fabric of my faith. The Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. He would suffer for the sins of others. He would be rejected, despised, yet bring salvation. Could it really be him? Could everything I'd been taught my whole life have been pointing to Jesus? But why would the Messiah suffer? I asked, my voice cracking. Why would he die? That doesn't make sense. Jesus stepped closer, his eyes filled with a tenderness that made my chest ache. Because love requires sacrifice, he said softly. Leah, the world was broken, filled with sin and separation from God. But God didn't want it to stay that way. He wanted to restore what was lost, to bring his children back to him. And the only way to do that was through a sacrifice, a perfect, unblemished sacrifice that could cover the sins of the world. I felt tears streaming down my face as his words sank in. You're talking about the cross, I whispered. He nodded. Yes, I came into the world to take on the weight of sin, to bear it on my shoulders, so that you and everyone could be free. My death wasn't the end, Leah. It was the beginning. Because 3 days later, I rose again, defeating sin and death once and for all. My heart felt like it was breaking open. The cross, the resurrection, these were stories I'd heard in passing, things I'd dismissed as myths or misunderstandings. But standing here, hearing it from him, it felt different. It felt real. But why would you do that? I asked, my voice trembling. Why would you go through all that pain? For what? For you, he said simply. For every person who has ever lived, who will ever live. For the ones who think they're too far gone. For the ones who are searching for something they can't name. For the ones who feel lost and broken. For you, Leah, because I love you. His words hit me like a wave, and I felt myself shaking, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Love. He'd done it all out of love, not out of obligation or duty, but because he loved me, loved everyone, enough to lay down his life. I don't know if I can believe this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It's too much. It's too different from everything I've known. I know it's hard," he said, his tone as gentle as ever. "I know it feels like too much, but I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now. I'm asking you to trust me, to open your heart and let me in. You've been searching for the truth, Leah, and now it's here, standing in front of you." I looked at him, my mind a whirlwind of questions and doubts. How could this be real? How could I reconcile everything he was saying with the faith I'd held on to my whole life? But at the same time, something inside me was shifting. A part of me, deep and quiet, believed him. "You have a choice to make," he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "You can hold on to the doubts, the fear, the life you've known, or you can step into the truth, into the light, and let me show you who you were always meant to be." Tears streamed down my face as his words settled over me. I wanted to choose, but I didn't know how. My whole life, I'd been clinging to what I thought was certainty, afraid to let go, afraid of what I might find on the other side. But now, standing here, I realized that maybe letting go wasn't about losing, it was about finding. "My time is running out?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes," he said softly, "but not in the way you think. Your time here, in this place, is coming to an end. But your time to choose is just beginning. When you go back, you'll have the chance to decide. But know this, Leah, I will always be with you, no matter what." His words filled me with a mix of hope and fear, and I realized that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. When I opened my eyes, the world felt jarringly loud and bright. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed faintly, and the sharp beeping of machines filled the air around me. My body felt heavy, almost foreign, like I'd been asleep for days. Pain tugged at me from somewhere deep, but it was muted, distant, like a memory my body hadn't fully processed yet. It took me a moment to realize where I was. A hospital room, the sterile smell, the stiff sheets beneath me, and the faint murmur of voices in the hallway made it unmistakable. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The last thing I remembered was the car, its blaring horn, the screech of tires, and the sensation of everything going dark. But here I was, alive. My chest rose and fell as I inhaled deeply, trying to calm the storm of thoughts racing through my mind. How was I alive? How had I come back? And more importantly, why? Before I could piece anything together, I heard a voice. "Leah?" It was soft but filled with urgency. My heart lurched as I turned my head and saw my husband, David, sitting in a chair beside me. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed with dark circles, as though he hadn't slept in days. The relief that washed over him when our eyes met was palpable, and he leaned forward, gripping my hand tightly. "You're awake," he said, his voice trembling. "Thank God you're awake." I tried to speak, but my throat felt raw, like I hadn't used it in weeks. I managed a small, raspy, "Hi," and David immediately reached for the cup of water on the bedside table, guiding it to my lips. The cool liquid soothed the dryness, and I felt a little stronger, though my mind was still spinning. "What happened?" I croaked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. David's face tightened, his grip on my hand never loosening. "You were hit by a car," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A drunk driver. They said you were..." You were gone for a moment, Leah. Your heart stopped. But then you came back." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. My heart stopped. I was gone. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. The memory of the light, the presence, and the voice flooding back to me all at once. Jesus. I had met Jesus. I had stood in his presence, felt his love, and heard him tell me the truth about who he was. And now I was back. David's eyes searched mine, his expression filled with concern. "Are you okay? Do you remember anything?" I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. How could I explain what I had seen, what I had felt? How could I put into words something so profound, so life-altering, when I barely understood it myself? I don't know," I said finally, looking away. "It's all a blur." He nodded, his brow furrowed. "The doctors said you might feel that way. They said it's normal after something like this." I nodded, but the truth was, nothing about what I felt was normal. I didn't feel like the same person who had stepped off that curb. I didn't feel like the Leah who had gone through the motions of life, questioning her faith, but too afraid to confront it. I felt different, changed, and yet I couldn't bring myself to say it, not yet. The door to the room opened, and my parents rushed in, their faces etched with worry and relief. My mother immediately began fussing over me, tears streaming down her face as she kissed my forehead and whispered prayers of gratitude. My father stood back, his eyes glistening as he quietly thanked God for my survival. Their presence was comforting, familiar, but it also reminded me of the weight of my heritage, the faith that had shaped so much of who I was. How could I tell them what I'd seen? How could I explain that I'd met Jesus, the very figure I'd been taught to see as separate, as someone who didn't belong to our story? As the hours passed, doctors came and went, running tests and checking my vitals. They spoke in calm, clinical tones, explaining that I'd been incredibly lucky to survive without more serious injuries. But luck didn't feel like the right word. I knew there was more to it than that. I knew I wasn't alive by chance. By the time the room quieted and visiting hours ended, I was left alone with David. He sat beside me, his hand still holding mine, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed the calm front he was trying to maintain. He hadn't left my side all day, but now that we were alone, I could feel the unspoken questions hanging between us. "Leah," he said softly, breaking the silence, "you've been quiet, more than usual. Is there something you're not telling me?" I looked at him, my heart pounding. David knew me better than anyone, and he could always tell when something was on my mind. But this wasn't something I could casually bring up. "What do you mean?" I asked, stalling for time. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I mean, you almost died, and ever since you woke up, it's like, I don't know, it's like you're here, but you're not. Did something happen, Leah, while you were gone?" His question hit me like a bolt of lightning. While I was gone, how could I begin to explain what I had experienced in that place? The light, the presence of Jesus, the truth he had revealed to me. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, unsure of where to start. "I don't know how to explain it," I said finally, my voice trembling. But something did happen, something I don't understand. David leaned closer, his eyes searching mine. What do you mean? I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. How could I tell him? Would he even believe me? And even if he did, what would it mean for us, for everything we'd built together? My hands trembled as I tried to find the right words, but the enormity of it all made my head spin. I saw something, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Or someone. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt real, more real than anything I've ever known. David's brow furrowed, his concern deepening. Leah, what are you saying? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I met someone, I said, my voice shaking. Someone who told me things I wasn't ready to hear, things that changed everything. His eyes widened, his grip on my hand tightening. Who? What did they say? I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. I can't keep it inside anymore, I said, my voice breaking. But I don't know how you'll react. The hospital room felt impossibly still as David stared at me, waiting for an answer. His eyes were filled with concern, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was bracing himself for whatever I was about to say. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment, I considered backing out, telling him it was nothing, that I just needed time to process. But I knew I couldn't do that, not anymore. I need to tell you something, I said finally, my voice trembling. But I don't know how to say it in a way that makes sense. David leaned forward, his expression softening just enough to encourage me. It's okay, he said quietly. Take your time. I'm here. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat making it difficult to speak. When I was gone, I began, choosing my words carefully. Something happened to me, something I never expected. I was somewhere else, David, somewhere I don't even know how to describe. His brow furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. His silence was both comforting and unnerving, as though he was giving me space to speak, but also processing the weight of what I was saying. I looked down at my hands, twisting them nervously in my lap. There was this light, I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't like anything I've ever seen before. It was warm, but not in a physical way. It was like it was wrapping itself around me, holding me, and I felt peace. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. David's eyes softened, and he nodded slightly, encouraging me to keep going. What else? He asked gently. I hesitated, my stomach churning. This was the hard part, the part I wasn't sure how to explain without completely upending everything we thought we knew about the world, about our faith. I wasn't alone, I said finally, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. There was someone there with me. He spoke to me. David's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't speak, his silence urging me to continue. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage I had. It was Jesus, I said, my voice cracking. David, I met Jesus. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, and for a moment the silence was deafening. I couldn't bring myself to look at him, afraid of what I might see in his expression, confusion, disbelief, maybe even anger. But when I finally glanced up, his face wasn't twisted in shock or judgment. Instead, he looked curious, thoughtful. "You met Jesus," he repeated, his voice measured, like he was testing the words on his tongue. "Are you sure? I mean, how do you know it was him?" "I just knew," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. "David, it was him. He called me by my name. He spoke to me about things I'd never told anyone, not even you. He told me that he's been with me my whole life, even when I didn't realize it. And he told me the truth about everything." David leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed as he processed what I was saying. "The truth about what?" "About who he is," I said, my voice breaking. "He told me he's the Messiah, David, the one we've been waiting for, the one the prophets spoke about. He said everything points to him, that all the promises we've clung to have already been fulfilled through him." David's eyes widened, and I could see the struggle on his face, the way he was wrestling with the weight of my words. That's a lot, Leah," he said carefully. "I don't even know where to start with that." "I know," I said quickly, my heart sinking. "I know it sounds impossible, and I don't blame you if you think I'm crazy, but I'm telling you, David, it was real. He was real." To my surprise, David didn't dismiss me or brush off my words. Instead, he leaned forward again, resting his elbows on his knees as he stared at the floor. "You're not crazy," he said softly. "I don't think that. I don't know what to do with this. It's not what we were taught. It's not what I grew up believing." His honesty disarmed me, and I felt a flicker of hope. "David," I said gently, "have you ever questioned it, our faith, the things we've been taught?" He looked up at me, his expression conflicted. "Of course I have," he admitted. "There have been times I've wondered if we've been missing something, if there's more to the story than what we know. But I never said anything because, well, I didn't want to rock the boat, and I didn't think you'd understand." Tears spilled down my cheeks as his words sank in. All this time, I thought I was alone in my doubts, in my questions. But here he was, admitting that he'd been wrestling with the same things. "I do understand," I said, my voice trembling. "I've felt the same way for so long, but I was afraid to say it, afraid of what it might mean." David reached for my hand, his grip firm and steady. "So, what do we do now?" he asked. "Where do we go from here?" I took a deep breath, the weight of his question settling over me. "I think we need to start by asking the hard questions," I said, "by looking at the things we've avoided for so long. And maybe we need to start with him." "Jesus," David said quietly, testing the name on his tongue. "You think he's the answer?" "I think he might be," I said, my voice steady, despite the emotions swirling inside me. "And I think we need to find out." David nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Okay," he said finally, "let's find out." For the first time, we weren't afraid to ask the hard questions, and the answers we found would change our lives forever. It's been months since that night in the hospital when I finally shared my story with David. Months since I uttered words I never thought I'd say. I met Jesus. At the time, I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know how my life or my faith would change. But looking back now, I see that everything about my life has been transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The journey hasn't been easy. Leaving behind my old beliefs felt like stepping into an unfamiliar world, one where the ground beneath me was shaky and uncertain. I grew up with traditions that shaped every part of my identity. My family's Jewish heritage wasn't just a faith, it was a history, a culture, a connection to something much bigger than myself. And for so long, I believed it was unchangeable, an anchor I couldn't and wouldn't let go of. But what I've come to realize is that embracing Jesus wasn't about leaving my heritage behind. It was about seeing it in a new light, understanding the fullness of what I'd been taught and how it all pointed to Him. The promises, the prophecies, the stories of redemption, they weren't erased, they were fulfilled. And that realization has brought me a peace I never thought I'd find. David and I have walked this path together, and that has been one of the greatest blessings. When I first told him about my experience, I worried it would drive a wedge between us, but instead, it became a bridge. For the first time, we felt free to ask the questions we'd both been too afraid to voice. We studied together, read scripture together, and talked late into the night about what it all meant. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments of doubt and confusion. But in those moments, we leaned on each other and on the faith we were building together. One of the hardest parts was telling our families. I'll never forget the look on my mother's face when I told her I'd decided to follow Jesus. It wasn't anger or disappointment, it was hurt. She couldn't understand why I would choose to walk a path that felt so foreign, so outside the faith she had raised me in. Her words were gentle but piercing. Have we not been enough for you? That question stayed with me for days, weighing heavily on my heart. I wrestled with how to explain it to her, how to make her see that this wasn't about rejecting our family or our heritage. It was about stepping into something bigger, something that had brought me a sense of purpose and hope I'd never known. When I finally sat down with her again, I told her the truth, the full story of what had happened to me, of what I'd seen and felt. She listened quietly, her eyes searching mine, and though I could see the pain in her expression, I also saw something else, love. She didn't fully understand, and I don't know if she ever will, but she told me she would always love me, and for that, I'm grateful. David's family had a similar reaction, though his father surprised us both by admitting that he'd also struggled with questions about faith over the years. It's brave to search for answers, he said, braver still to change when you find them. As David and I continued to explore this new chapter of our lives, we found a community of believers who welcomed us with open arms. At first, I felt out of place, unsure if I belonged, but the people we met didn't see us as outsiders. They saw us as family. They walked alongside us, answered our questions, and encouraged us to keep seeking. Their kindness and patience were a reflection of the very love I'd felt when I met Jesus, and it gave me the courage to keep going. One of the most profound changes has been in my marriage. David and I were always close, but this journey has brought us even closer. There's something about sharing a faith, about praying together and seeking answers together, that deepens a relationship in ways I can't fully explain. We've learned to be vulnerable with each other, to admit when we're struggling or unsure, and to support each other in those moments. Our love has grown stronger because it's rooted in something greater than ourselves. The peace I've found in my faith has also transformed how I see the world. Before, I carried so much fear and uncertainty, always questioning if I was enough, if I was doing the right thing, if I was on the right path. But now, I know that my worth isn't tied to my achievements or my ability to meet some impossible standard. My worth comes from the love of a Savior who saw me at my lowest and still chose me. That knowledge has freed me in ways I never thought possible. There are still challenges, of course. Faith isn't a cure-all that makes life easy or erases every struggle. There are days when I feel overwhelmed, when the doubts creep back in, whispering that maybe I've made a mistake, that maybe I don't belong. But in those moments, I remember the light, the warmth, the voice that called my name and told me I was loved. And I know that no matter how hard things get, I'm not alone. One of the greatest joys of this journey has been sharing my story. At first, I was hesitant, afraid of how people might react, but every time I've shared it, I've been met with kindness and curiosity. People have told me that my story has given them hope, that it's made them think about their own faith and their own questions. That's all I could ever hope for, that my experience might inspire someone else to seek, to question, and to discover the truth for themselves. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that faith is a journey. It's not about having all the answers or living a perfect life. It's about being open to the truth, open to change, and open to the love that's always been there, waiting for us to see it. No matter where you are or what you believe, there's always more to discover, and sometimes it takes the most unexpected journey to find it. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to check out more incredible near-death experiences on our channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to help spread these powerful stories of hope and transformation. See you in the next video.